All right, what's up, everybody? So this is just a recap over recent news in the AI space from the last week. And probably the top three most intriguing news for me would have to have come from Anthropic, OpenAI, and then China's very own DeepSeek. So we'll start with Anthropic. On October 16th, they introduced something called Agent Skills. And Agent Skills, as you can see here, allows you to improve how Claude itself performs specific tasks. Skills are folders that include instructions, scripts, and resources that Claude can load when needed. Now, what's interesting about this is the instructions, scripts, and resources that Claude can load when needed is actually very similar to what I've already been setting up for myself in Notion. So I noticed there was a behavior that I had which could easily be replicated from ChatGPT folders, because in ChatGPT you would often have to put in instructions for a folder and then do your chats inside of that. But you can actually take that behavior over into Notion as well. And this is an example of my own prompt instructions library inside Notion. So if I called this my skills library, it would probably be similar to what Claude has now set up through a native skills function. All right. So I'll just take that out. Now it says here, Claude will only access a skill when it's relevant to the task at hand. So this is where context engineering comes in. And when used, skills make Claude better at specialized tasks like working with Excel. Now, the reason why this matters is because this is actually about saving on token consumption. Because one of the criticisms for AI and a lot of LLMs is that even though it can process a lot, it doesn't always need to process everything. And so it becomes quite inefficient if it does actually need to process every single word or token or visual that you give it. So with skills, essentially what it's doing is that it's using these skills just like human beings have skills and loading that in for context as needed. All right, so you can see how it's using now, right? So going through Google Drive, and then you can see here, it's taking the context. So reading the poster design skill. So it knows which skill to bring in depending on the task, which I think is actually really good. All right. It requires you to think more about what are the actual skills, the repeatable tasks, or the things that you might even try to automate that you do on a day to day basis. Most people, even without AI or before AI, don't actually stop to evaluate and analyze their own day to day schedules, tasks, and processes. And as a result, they don't even know what skills they need to use. So I think AI is getting, of course, it's improving every single day. But I think what this is doing is it's allowing people to take the time to evaluate, okay, what are these skills that I am using on a day-to-day basis, setting that up, and then having Claude essentially use these skills. Now, what I suspect will happen is that in the future, we will essentially get to either a browser-based AI observation stage, which is already happening, right? And that's going to bring us into ChatGPT Atlas next. But the final boss stage essentially is going to be where the entire operating system like Windows or Mac OS will observe all your behavior and be able to give that information back to you. The issue though is trust. How trust do we have or do we feel like we can give to a lot of these companies? Now, to be fair, a lot of our data is already being spied on, scraped by large tech companies. Okay. So this is just making things, I think, we're becoming more consciously aware of this. And this goes back to why I started conscious stack design and specifically the conscious stack movement, which is there to push and advance conscious technologies in general and conscious technologists. So right now we're hitting a point where we need to start aligning our tech more consciously because otherwise our own cognition will atrophy and we'll be left in the dark as AI starts to automate a lot of these things for us. And it's important for us to use AI as a partner, a collaborator, versus something that is just there to replace everything that we do. Skills. So I won't go too much into how skills work specifically. There are many other great videos and creators who are creating tutorials around how to use Claude skills. But I'm sharing this with you because this is news that is newsworthy. And so I highly recommend that you check this out because super useful feature on Claude. Now, this takes us to the latest news from OpenAI, which is ChatGPT Atlas. What is ChatGPT Atlas? ChatGPT Atlas essentially is OpenAI's response to AI-based browsers. So we have a browser called Comet that came out from Perplexity not too long ago. This became really popular. Then we have Dia, which is my personal fave browser at this point in time, because it's, well, at least for me, it's super clean. It does what you expect it to. It's from the makers of the Arc browser. And for me, it just works and it aligns with my own preferences, my own inner stack. Now, back to ChatGPT Atlas, what they're doing is responding, right, to market movements. And they've already set up an ecosystem whereby they can easily just do what Comet and Dia browser have done and just come in and swoop up all of the users if they're not yet fixed in the other browsers, right? Because it's still very early on in the competition for AI companies. Now, the benefits of a ChatGPT based browser, well, you can see, right? If you're using ChatGPT on the regular already in your day to day life or work, and if you have a browser that is connected to your ChatGPT activity, this is probably no different to Google, right? And Google Workspace. Google started out with Gmail and then it expanded into many other complementary products. Now, not every single product that they put out did well, right? Some of them failed miserably. But you can see how they start off with Gmail, went into Google Drive, Meet, Calendar, all these others. And they just started bringing in everything under one roof. Now, for people who are workaholics or have a lot of interconnected parts, there is a benefit to unifying a lot of the activities that are easily taken care of through the Google Suite. All right. So this sort of strategy or play is all about just grabbing mind share and taking as much control as possible over all the users by reducing friction. OpenAI's Gmail moment was ChatGPT. And now that ChatGPT has some pretty significant market and mind share, they're going after more markets that are quite complementary and make sense for them to pull other people in to their universe. And so that's what they're doing with this. And if you are somebody who's trying to keep your own sovereignty, right? It's very important that you pay attention to what's happening here and don't get too sucked into the momentum, the hype, and the convenience. Because this is where you really need to take a look at, like, okay, what is your inner stack? And if you want more information about what an inner stack is, just comment below or check out some of my other videos. When you know what your inner stack is, it makes it really easy to set up your outer stacks, whether it's for yourself professionally or personally, or when you're working with other teams and companies. By doing this, you're actually starting to align your values and all the invisible aspects that are happening within you that gets manifested, projected, or reflected in your outer tools and culture. And again, this is the whole philosophy around a conscious stack, right? Is as AI accelerates, it's going to be harder and harder for you to keep up with all the tools. So it becomes more important that you simply know your own stack, which is the same as knowing yourself in this great sea of technology and all things digital. All right. So this is ChatGPT Atlas, and it's the second most interesting piece of news from the last week. Next up, we've got DeepSeek. All right. So here, DeepSeek just did something wild. They built an OCR system. Now, I'm going to show you a good example of how I use Dia browser. And I'll pull this up here so you can see what is OCR. And so you're going to see what I'm doing in Dia browser is essentially what you can expect to see with ChatGPT's Atlas. All right, you can use AI right within the browser. OCR is a technology that converts images of text into editable, searchable digital text. Optical character recognition is what OCR stands for. Okay, so I'm going to close that. So this compresses long text into vision tokens, literally turning paragraphs into pixels. Their model, DeepSeek, achieves 90% decoding precision at 10x compression and still manages 60% accuracy. So what is this? What is this saying? What is this the equivalent of? So essentially, instead of reading the tokens, what it's doing is converting those tokens into pixels and then reading that and achieving the same accuracy without going through the traditional process of trying to read every single token in the traditional way. And so you can see here, this says this could solve one of AI's biggest problems, long context inefficiency. And why is this a problem? Well, memory. So it's a really interesting thing because if you see how AI is replicating human beings, right? We often get really surprised or impressed by people who have good memory of things in general, right? If somebody remembers your name or remembers something that happened in the past that you might have forgotten, it's quite impressive, right? And so we are starting to project our own expectations of that intelligence into AI. And so we are now wanting AI to remember more so that we don't have to keep repeating ourselves. Okay. And all these compressions that we're seeing, right? So 10x compression, these are similar to memory techniques that allow human beings to remember more by essentially making things more efficient in our own minds. And AI, of course, is going through the same right now. So it's really interesting personally to see how this is playing out in real time as a technology, because you're seeing kind of like the formation of human beings in a way, but of course that is artificial and like non-organic or non-biological. For compression, essentially, this just means we're probably going to see more advancements, more innovation in memory in the near future. Okay, and so if we go back to latest news, you got here from Brian Romilly. China DeepSeek does it again, an entire encyclopedia compressed into a single high resolution image. Okay, so he's giving more examples of what DeepSeek has done and why this matters. So, the training data supplied by the Chinese government for free and not available to any US company. So, Brian, just for context, is also really big on high protein data, which is essentially giving high quality data to AI so that its outputs are also reflective of the inputs that it's receiving. The problem with Western data in the AI space is that there's a lot of junk, which is kind of interesting, right? Because you see this correlation between food in the West, and especially from the US, that is known to be so modified, so injected with artificial things in general that that sort of fake processed food makes its way into the bodies of fellow humans, right, within those parts of the world, and how that then results in increased sicknesses, increased illnesses, etc., mental health problems, right? And then in Western AI models, there's a lot of suffering of hallucinations. So again, these are the sort of things that I personally pay attention to. And if you start digging into AI from a technical standpoint, you start to see some of those connections yourself. But China and other models, essentially, they're going for the high protein data input method, which does result in way more efficient LLMs. And so you can see here, the model doesn't just read. So you understand now why I said that the US needs a Manhattan Project for AI training data. Do you hear me now? Oh, still no, I'll continue. So of course, Brian's very passionate about this, but I think he's on the money. Some people might think that he's a bit of an outlier, he's a bit too out there, but to be honest, that's where innovation comes from, often at the fringes of society, right? And innovation does not happen where things are safe. So, yeah, I highly recommend it that you check out more on the DeepSeek side with their OCR compression news. Give DeepSeek a shot. You can download it for free, open source on your own laptop. You do not have to use their servers because when DeepSeek first came out, people worried about, China spying, China bad, and a lot of that data going to Chinese servers. But let's be real, a lot of the data that's going to Western servers are being used by government in the West as well, anyways, right? So it's really a perception game and what you're going to be honest with yourself about. All right. So, yeah, with all this, I think what's super fascinating is just, again, the increased developments of AI in general, the agents, the compression techniques, and how this is essentially pushing us to look more at our role in this type of society, this type of future where AI dominates. What does it mean to be human? How can we align ourselves more consciously so that we are not just being forced all these new technologies with each new wave and not really knowing how to sync or configure ourselves regardless of those external influences or forces? So, there you have it. News from the last week. If you have any questions, just feel free to put it in the comments. And till next time.